Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Craig Foss.
Mr Speaker, you really do have to hand it to the Labor Party, don't you? 100 years old and they can still think up new taxes. 100 years old, they still come up with new levies, new ways to attack business, new ways to attack jobs, Mr Speaker. 100 years old and they're still coming up with new ways to tax people. Mr Speaker, the announcement Labor made on the weekend has turned into a shambles. An absolute shambles. A battle with the media is now going on. I now understand what post-truth politics is. It's the days after a Labor conference when they try to explain whatever they were trying to explain on the weekend, whatever announcement it might have been, Mr Speaker. No one really knows, I don't think, what they announced on the weekend. No one really knows if it's the costings are for 4 months, 6 months, 15 mil per annum, 60 mil for 4 years, 90 mil for 6 years, 6 months, Mr Speaker. No one really knows. Their new tax, their new levies, their tax on training, Mr Speaker. Their levies on migrants, Mr Speaker, is very interesting, particularly with what's going on around the world. Essentially, it's been viewed as an attack on migrants, an attack on small business, an attack on jobs, and jobs will pay. Mr Speaker, commentary from those that actually know what it's like to run a business has not been at all flattering for the Labor Party. Business New Zealand said smaller businesses would suffer if businesses were charged to hire employees. Tourism New Zealand, Aotearoa, said putting a levy on small business would fall flat on its face. Mr Speaker, Mr Nash, even when was asked about it, said, and I quote, I would need to read about that a little bit more. I would need to think that through, work that through. Mr Speaker, hardly a ringing endorsement of the policies that the Labor Party announced or tried to announce and re-explained on the weekend, Mr Speaker. And the timing's amazing. 144,000 new jobs across New Zealand over the past year. Growth as good as it's been in New Zealand for many, many, many years. The envy of the OECD, Mr Speaker, in the developed nations. 70% of those engaged in employment, or under 5% unemployed, Mr Speaker. All the numbers are very, very positive, and job and participation and the normal unemployment numbers, and that's when Labor decide what a good time to talk about unemployment, etc., etc. Everything is going in the right direction. Labor has no idea what their policies would mean for small business. Labor has no idea about the cost and the burden of the stuff they wax lyrical about at their various conferences. Perhaps that's why 57% of small businesses under recent surveys believe they'll succeed under National, with only 10% would succeed under Labor, Mr Speaker. Only under 10%. They always forget someone, somewhere has to pay for the stuff they announce. Someone has to pay. They might pay in cash. They might pay in taxes. They might pay in less jobs, less job growth, less hours, Mr Speaker. They just have to pay. Someone pays somewhere. Interestingly, Mr Speaker, let's use, I don't know, Mount Roskill, for example. 5,000 business units in Mount Roskill, Mr Speaker. Which one of them would pay Labor's tax? All of them? Some of them? Which of the 5,000 businesses in Mount Roskill would be paying Labor's news training tax? Which of the 28,000 workers in Mount Roskill, Mr Speaker, would start to not have a job, not have as good a job opportunities under Labor's proposals, Mr Speaker? The added costs that would be the burden on businesses across the economy, but for example, the 5,000 business units in Mount Roskill, Mr Speaker. Which of the migrants that choose to come or want to come to, say, Mount Roskill, Mr Speaker, would suffer under the levy or, let's say, the bias against them under their proposals? Which of the 50% of the people in Mount Roskill who were born overseas would suffer because if Labor's policy was to be implemented? Be it jobs, job growth, levy, new taxes, new training taxes, Mr Speaker. I'm quite sure the people of Mount Roskill will be thinking through what it means to them if Labor's policy was ever to be implemented. The cost of tax, the cost of levy, the cost of jobs and the cost of prospects, Mr Speaker, to the good, hard-working people of Mount Roskill particularly who have chosen to come, live and work hard and contribute to New Zealand. Thank you, Mr Speaker.